Hello, welcome back. Hey everybody, how you doing? Woo, I heard good. All right. Our youngest student tonight. Thanks for being here. All right, welcome everybody. We have one class to go. One reminder, next week we have Paul Greenberg, a New York Times bestselling author who's written 3 books. He's going to be talking about his book, For Fish, about sustainable seafood next week. Again, like all classes, it's always free and open to the public. By the way, for folks sitting in the back, there's plenty of seats. If you want to come up, you're welcome to. All right, so I want to just make an announcement. In your inbox tomorrow morning, many of you, and on Canvas, you're going to receive a link to a survey about the class. This is for students. This is in addition to the one you get from the registrar. For community members, it's the only survey you're gonna get. Please take it. It only takes a few minutes, but it's so valuable for us to hear from you. What you've learned from this class, what you liked about it, what you hated about it, what we can do next year. It also helps us to raise money for the course so that we can help to track some of the outcomes. So please fill it out. It really means a lot. All right, raise your hand if you still need an eye clicker. Anyone? Community attendees? Does anyone still need one? Keep your hands raised if so. Also, this is our last weekend. If you want to volunteer at D-Town Farm this weekend, email Elise. You can do Saturday or Sunday. The hours are listed. I think it's been a great experience for the students who have been there so far. And then I won't read them all this time, but thank you again to our generous sponsors for the class. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Lesli, who's going to introduce our topic and introduce our panelists.
Great, thanks, Lily. So the title of our talk tonight, can you all hear me all right back there? So the title of our panel tonight is Radicalizing Food Systems Education, Perspectives from Detroit to Chiapas. So we're going to be covering a lot of ground tonight, thinking about how can we teach children and youth that another food system is possible, and also give them the tools and motivation to try to be a part of transforming it. Thinking about what the role of school gardens, teacher education programs, and community-based education programs play in consciousness raising around our food system. And we're also going to be thinking about how can the food students eat in school play a role in the education process, and how easy or not it is to try to change the food that's served in our schools. I'm really excited by the range of perspectives that we're going to hear from on our panel tonight. We have Chef Kevin Frank, who's Assistant Director of Catering and Hospitality, and currently until Monday, you're also the head chef, right? Or only chef, really? The only chef for the Detroit Public Schools Community District. He also serves on the Detroit Food Policy Council. We also have Monique Thompson, Program Assistant for Feed 'em Freedom Growers, which is a really great urban farm in Detroit that does a lot of work around youth and education, which we'll learn more about. Helda Morales, Helda and Bruce Ferguson are both here. Many of you interacted with them. They've been sitting up in front all semester long. They're here visiting us from the Department of Agriculture, Society, and Environment at El Colegio de la Frontera Sur, which is in San Cristobal de las Casas in Chiapas, Mexico. Both of them are researchers and professors there, and have also been involved in a variety of efforts around food systems education. So, before we get into our panel tonight, though, I want to get your clickers warmed up and get you thinking about some of the topics that we're going to be talking about tonight. So again, turn on your clicker and push BB to get it synced. The first question is, if you had a garden at your school, what was the most significant part of it for you? A, my school didn't have a garden. B, environmental and science learning. C, growing and or preparing my own food. D, a change from classroom activities. Or E, some other reason that you appreciated having a garden, if you had one. I did not have a garden. My school didn't have it. Wow, 70% of you did not have gardens. All right, so it's not as common a trend as maybe it is today. Interesting. All right, for the second question, what was your favorite meal in elementary school? Pizza, chicken nuggets, milk pouches, which I had to learn what that is. I hated all school food, D, or E, I always brought my lunch, so never really ate the school food. Oh, that's an image of a pouch of milk. All right, a lot of you brought your lunch to school, 41%, interesting. But otherwise, pizza was 27%. I realize I did not formulate this in a way that allows you to choose something else, so maybe broccoli was your favorite, I'm not sure. But 1% of you, see Lily, I didn't think people would know about milk pouches. All right, we'll have a couple more clicker questions later on. But I want to get into the heart of the talk, or the panel tonight. The way we're going to start is by first hearing from everyone for about 7 or 10 minutes each. And what we'd like to hear first is just about the kinds of activities and programs you and your organizations are involved with that either relate to food systems education or efforts to change the content and sourcing of school food. And also a little bit about how you came to do the work you're doing today. You know, what was your career path and why are you motivated to do this kind of work? So if we could start with Chef Frank.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, so again, my name is Kevin Frank. I'm the Assistant Director of the Office of School Nutrition for Detroit Public Schools Community District. We do obviously quite a bit as it pertains to school food because we're Detroit School Food Authority. We do CACFP, which is Child and Adult Care Food supper programs. We do summer school feeding. We do Meet Up to Eat Up, which is feeding outside of the summer schools at parks or recreation centers for underprivileged students. I am also on the Detroit Food Policy Council. I'm the K-12 holder and treasurer. I work with the Motion Coalition, which is the Michigan organization to impact obesity and nutrition. And the reason I do all of this, honestly, is purely selfish because I have 2 young children, and I want to impact the food system in a positive way for them moving forward. When I first started working in school food, to be completely honest with you, it was kind of a means to an end. I needed a job, and as I matured, I guess, and as I started working a little bit closer, I kind of noticed some things. One thing that I noticed was that nutrition education was pretty much complete. I matriculated through DPS, and nutrition education was pretty much completely absent. Beyond maybe a 3-week program that we had in our health class, which incidentally for me was taught by my father. So, if you ever had sex ed taught by your father, it's scarring. So don't do that. But all the nutrition education I ever had was 3 weeks in that one class and half a semester in 9th grade. So a lot of our students and our parents, who I'm obviously the same age as a lot of our parents, we don't really necessarily know how to eat or how the food system affects us because we were never taught it. So I want to change that, which is kind of why I find myself in the position that I'm in. And as it pertains to my career path, I went to school for engineering and became a chef. So when I was in school, I wasn't really the best student, specifically high school. So I wanted to be an aeronautical engineer, but couldn't get a scholarship to go to Western. So 18-year-old me, who was a genius, by the way, thought I'll put myself through culinary school because I could afford to put myself through Schoolcraft, which is where I went, and I'll use the money I make as a chef right out of college, which doesn't happen, to put myself through engineering school. Found out, however, that I'm actually pretty good at cooking and kind of pretty good at leading people too, so stuck with it. Fast forward, after a decade in the restaurant industry, the economy took a downturn in like 07, 08, and I was working at an Irish pub in Lansing and got laid off. Needed to find a job, started working at a charter school in Southwest Detroit, worked there for 5 years, and met my previous executive director, whose name is Betty Wiggins. Some people, so you know her? Yeah, so lots of people know her, okay. So yeah, Betty Wiggins found me at a summer school training seminar and said she was looking for a chef. I interviewed 2 weeks later, and I've been with DPS since 2012. So we've actually had a chef for 5 years, and nobody knew.
So you were very efficient in your time, so I'm going to ask you just a couple more questions since you still have time left.
Yeah, I talk very fast, sorry.
Could you tell us too a little bit, so you obviously manage a lot of school food during the school year, but it sounds like in the summer too, but tell us a little bit about the garden too that the school district has, and gardens across the schools.
Yep, so that's, oh, it's gone. But Bennett, that was one of our schools, right?
Oh, I don't know. Lily had the pictures, probably.
So I'm 80% sure that was one of our school gardens. So we
Yeah, it was.
the Detroit School Garden Collaborative, the DSGC, is our farming program basically. So currently we have garden beds at, I want to say 57 of our schools, as well as a 2.5 acre farm at Drew Transition Center, which is a post-secondary program for EI, emotionally impaired and cognitively impaired students. That farm produces roughly 25,000, 40,000 pounds of produce a year, which, believe it or not, is not even enough for one day's service, because we serve about 47 to 50,000 meals a day. And as it pertains to produce specifically, we'd be looking at around 30,000 servings, which is about 7,500 pounds. So that's it.
But youth and their students can be involved in the farm and.
Yes and no. During the summer, we hire high school students. During the school year, it's actually managed by our staff. There's liability issues, and because of the fact that it's paid for with USDA funds, we can't really necessarily use it as an educational piece. We have a partnership with the science program, but they have their own individual hoop house in the front of the school. So the farm is all used for production, for school lunches.
Great. Well, and the last thing I want to ask you about is maybe you could tell, I thought it was interesting that you also have an advisory council of students that help you think about menus. How does that work?
So we have a menu advisory council. It's not just students, it's all involved stakeholders. So it's students, teachers, our staff, parents, and we meet every third Tuesday of the month. And we talk about the menu. We have 3 cycle menus. We have autumn, spring, or autumn, winter, and spring. And we consult about the menu. We consult about customer service. We consult about menu items. The students tell me what they want on the menu, which is generally pizza and chicken wings. And I tell them why we can't give them pizza and chicken wings every day, and then we try to come to an understanding. And the parents didn't really tell me that they want the students to have salmon and quinoa. Then I have to tell the parents why we can't have salmon and quinoa every day, and then we have to come to an understanding. And then eventually, we get a menu made.
That's great. I'll come back to you. I know a lot more that we can learn from you, so we'll be back to visit with you again in a minute. Monique.
Am I on?
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank you. And in the spirit of truth, I would like to take 10 seconds of silence to acknowledge the indigenous people of this land. And also, if we can acknowledge the people who were brought to this land through the diaspora, who were exploited for their work and helped build the wealth of this land. Thank you. And I would also like to acknowledge that those people were masters of the land, and they had beautiful relationships with this land. And our work is in the spirit of that. Again, my name is Monique Thompson. I am a Feed 'em Freedom grower. I work with Feed 'em Freedom Growers. It is a nonprofit grassroots organization on the Lower East Side of Detroit. Our work is youth and family oriented. We have programs and our programs are geared towards enriching our community with the knowledge that Chef Kevin acknowledges that we were not taught. And some of our programs are the Cook Fresh Workshop, which is a farm to plate program. We harvest food, and we have nutritional information and cooking and preparation, which takes place. We have a roundtable discussion, which takes different topics, current events, issues, and we bring those things up and we discuss it as a community. We have a wonderful summer program for youth ages 11 to 14. And it is a 5-week intensive program where children, our youth in our community come together and, pardon me, our children come together and work together and, pardon me, you all, I'm going completely blank. It's really, I'm going to be honest, I'm speaking in truth. It is really difficult to speak about something that I'm so passionate about, so I'm not trying to bring all of my passion to the table, and I really want you all to feel me with this. But we are in our 10th year, and it started as just a small plot in our yard, and it has grown to. My mom is sitting in the audience. This is who I tag team with. Can you tell me how many plots of land we have? We have 4 plots where we grow. And let me back up.
Sure.
Okay. I started at Western Michigan University. I wanted to be a doctor. And I was sitting in microbiology in a lecture hall similar to this, a little larger, and something clicked, and I said being a doctor wasn't for me. So I began to study athletic training with my obsession with the body. And at Western, I learned that my program was not accredited. So I went home and I transferred to Wayne State, and I began to study exercise and sports science. And I had a professor, it was a nutrition class, and he spoke about 2 things I had never heard of. One was kale and one was elderberry. He taught me that kale was the most nutrient-dense vegetable that there is, and elderberry was the most nutrient-dense fruit that there was. And I thought that he was lying because I had never heard of these things. And at this time, I was 20 or 21. So that is what really sparked my interest in growing food and nutrition. So at the same time, my mother, who was having allergies to food, aspartame or aspartame, however it's pronounced, was one of the things that gave her severe reactions. So we remembered that my great-grandmother and her grandmother grew food in the back of our garage at our house. So we knew that we had this skill, so we took those lessons and that love and started our own plot when urban farming was really taking off in Detroit. So it grew from a single bed to multiple beds to now what we have our multiple plots. And my dad, who is an artist, was making a mural that said freedom. The way he drew it, he left out the R and freedom, and but it was a piece that had a reflection, so it became Feed 'em Freedom. That is our name, and that is what we stand for. Our motto is grow a garden, grow a community, and through that we grow relationships, and we're growing ourselves and planting seeds of change on the east side of Detroit. We have impacted people worldwide, not just in our community. We have met and seen many, many, many people, and that change is what we are, and it is what we are choosing to be. It is not just something that we are waiting around to happen. And we have done work in daycares. We have done work in elementary schools. And at this time, we are renovating a house in our neighborhood to serve as a hub for our work. My mom is smiling at me. Is there anything that I am possibly forgetting?
Do you have a youth internship program that you've run?
We do not have a youth internship, but our summer enrichment program, we do award our youth with stipends. They are granted at the end of our 5-week program, money for their work. we partner with Detroit Summer, which is another youth organization in Detroit. We partner, we are anchor members of the National Black Food and Justice Association, which is a national organization. I believe Dara Cooper, the director of that organization, was here last week, which is an organization that is striving to uplift the work of Black-led organizations, reclaiming the land, and we work with the Detroit Black Food Security Network, D-Town Farms, Hanifa Ajumam, Baba Malik Yakini in the city. And it was my, like I said, my obsession with the body and knowing that the body is a perfect vessel, and knowing that we don't have the tools to feed this perfect vessel in our community, and wanting to make a way for that to be possible is really what leads and drives the work at FFG.
Great. I think that's a great beginning and introduction, and we'll also come back to you because I know there's a lot more that we can learn.
There is a lot more. Thank you.
Thank you. Helda, do you all want this?
And I won my PowerPoint.
You can use this. You don't have to stand up if you want. Yeah. Yep.
Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for this wonderful opportunity to tell you about our work in the search of a more just, healthier, and delicious food system. I want to first to start telling you how two ecologists became involved in a food literacy program in Chiapas. And you will be maybe surprised that part of the story starts here, exactly in this building. But maybe the first and main responsible are the bugs. I fell in love with insects when I was in college in Guatemala, my home country. And I was also very concerned that we were using so many pesticides to control pests in agriculture. So I dedicated most of my life to develop ways to manage these bugs without using these dangerous pesticides. And also the legacy of my ancestors. I am in love with this landscape from the highlands of Guatemala, and also with the knowledge that farmers from there, like my great-grandmother that used to cultivate this land, have on how to produce food. So it was with that knowledge and passion that I came to the University of Michigan to get a PhD degree 25 years ago to study agroecology with Yvette Perfecto. And during my agroecology class with John Vandermeer in Angel Hall, in one of those classrooms, is that I saw for the first time Bruce. And he's going to tell you more about our story together.
Well, I'm also very excited to be here and grateful to have the opportunity to think about some of the similarities with what we're doing and what's happening in Detroit, because I think there's a lot to talk about. So my training was as a plant ecologist, and I spent a lot of the early years of my career bent over doing plant surveys. But when I started teaching about restoration ecology, tropical biological conservation, my concept of restoration ecology developed into something much more like what's depicted here of restoration as sort of a tightly intertwined relationship between culture and ecology. So to think about how to restore a landscape, we have to think about ecological history, we have to think about the cultural memory of the people who have lived on that land, and then there's a process of cultural reflection in which people think about, okay, what would we like this place to look like in the future? How could we have healthier relationships among ourselves and with the earth? And I think you'll see how this vision influences also what we're doing with food systems.
So after that, Bruce finished his PhD in the lowlands of Guatemala. He had this contradiction in his life, that he had promised to follow me everywhere, but he didn't see how we could live and make a life in the lowlands of Guatemala. But fortunately, we found a job in Chiapas, that is the most southern state in Mexico, in this research center, El Colegio de la Frontera Sur, where we had been working for more than 20 years now. And I was very excited with the idea because Chiapas is just next to the border with Guatemala. And also because we learned about the Zapatista movement that arose in '94 and how they were dreaming, and they are still dreaming about a better world, and that a better world is possible. We were also very attracted about the landscape of Chiapas. We have highlands that go above 9,000 feet above sea level, with forests of pines and oaks. We have the Lacandon jungle in the lowlands. We have the dry forest in the Central Valley, and the very rich soils in the Pacific coast from the volcanoes. And that allow this rich culture, mainly from Mayan people. Indigenous people still occupy the land, and they have developed these wonderful, diverse agroecosystems like the milpa, that is the polycrop of corn, beans, squash, and dozens of plants that are edible and are wild and cultivated. And also the agroforestry system, that is the intercrop of trees with crops or with animals that provide food for us, and also conserve a lot of the biodiversity. So I was intrigued on how farmers, indigenous farmers from Chiapas, were able to produce good food and at the same time conserve the environment. With those crops, they were able to create rich gastronomy, indigenous gastronomy that has been proved to be very healthy, but unfortunately, it has been unseen because of the racism and also by the ignorance of nutritionism, thinking that because it doesn't have enough meat or milk is not good enough. So racism and ignorance, the part of our government that is pushing fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides, and monocrops with the idea that we need to produce more food, even if it's not nutrition and it doesn't belong to our culture, is what it's provoking the crisis that we are having now in Chiapas, and that Bruce is going to talk to you more about.
Yeah, so Chiapas has always been one of the poorest states in Mexico, one of the least food secure states. So there's a lot of people that don't know where their next meal is coming from. But at the same time, like the rest of Mexico, we're seeing the food systems become industrialized very, very rapidly, particularly since NAFTA came into effect in 1994, not coincidentally when the Zapatista uprising occurred. And actually, there have been a couple of New York Times stories about the food situation in several countries around the world and how it's becoming industrialized, how this is affecting people's health. And they use Chiapas as a case study, partly because things have happened there so quickly. When we moved there to San Cristobal de las Casas, there weren't really any supermarkets. All of a sudden, there were waves of supermarkets coming in. And then after that, a whole bunch of convenience stores. I think a really important part of this in terms of health is the consumption of soda. So Mexico is the country in the world that consumes the most soda per capita. Chiapas is the state within Mexico that consumes the most soda. And the highlands of Chiapas, the Maya area where we live and work, is within Chiapas where people drink the most sugary drinks. So that's part of the story, and this graph, Mexico is that top line here. These are Latin American countries and their consumption of heavily processed food and drink from 99 to 2013. So you can see they're all going up, but particularly Mexico, and people are consuming over 200 kilos of this crap a year. And at the same time, there's abandonment of the countryside because of NAFTA, because people can no longer make a living as farmers. There aren't good markets for their produce. So people are becoming separated from their food and agricultural traditions very, very quickly. And in Mexico as a whole, there are 5 times as many people that die from diabetes as die from organized crime. So organized crime gets all the headlines, that's what people talk about, what people are worried about, but they really ought to be a lot more focused on diabetes as well. We've got 80,000 people a year dying from diabetes, and that's gone up 20% in 6 years.
So with this crisis is that we start questioning ourselves, that if the work that we are doing, the research documenting how wonderful the agroecosystems are in Chiapas were not enough to change the food system. Because even our colleagues at our research institution, the agroecologists promoting polycrops and biological pest management in the fields, were not thinking what they were eating. So we thought we need to do something about it. And we knew also that they got very upset when we were criticizing the way that they were eating. So with my colleague and friend Ronald Knight, who is an anthropologist and a farmer, we decided to go and talk with kids because they had to listen to us since they were already in the classroom. And for our surprise, they were happy that we were talking about food and how food is produced. And very fast they learned, and they got conscious of how of the importance of farmers producing the food that they ate. So we also learned that the school is also a problem, because for many of the indigenous kids in the rural areas of Chiapas, the school is the first place where they discover industrialized food and junk food. That's what is sold there. That is what is provided by the government for lunches or for breakfast. And also because the curricula is designed in Mexico City in a context that is completely different from what they live. So most kids learn in rural areas of Chiapas that the food that they eat at home is not good enough, that what they are learning in school is not good enough to stay at home. They prepare themselves to go out, to migrate to the cities or to the United States. That's the dream. So we also discovered that teachers were in need of learning, and they were very interested and preoccupied of the way that the kids were eating. So that's why we discovered the power of school gardens that have been documented everywhere on the impact that they can have on the food system. And we started a program appropriated to Chiapas. And that's when we invite Bruce and our colleague Kimberly Chung from Michigan State University to join us and help us to design this program for teachers from preschool to college. And for 2 years, we invited teachers to come with us and spend a summer vacation with us and a weekend for every month during the whole school year to learn about agroecology, about conscious eating, about traditional knowledge, and also about science. We wanted to give them the power of being curious and learn about the food system. And I don't know what happened here with the harvest, but we were very happy with the result after 2 years of offering this program, because the teachers were very interested, the school supervisors too, and we learned that they gained a lot of appreciation about agroecology, that they experiment in the schools, they did some inquiry-based learning, they appreciate the traditional knowledge of the kids and the families that they were teaching. And for our surprise, they changed their food habits. So it seems that us grown-ups with very strong heads, we can also change our food consumption. And the proof is these teachers that after spending time with us, some of them started to go buying their food to the farmer's market, not so much at the grocery store. Some of them start to raise and produce their own food, and some of them became vegetarians. So we really believe that school gardens are hot, but there are also some problems. We found that they are not for everybody, that they need space, especially in Chiapas, where the teachers need to change sometimes like every year, school from school. So imagine to build a new garden each time that they go to a new place. Sometimes they don't have enough space, sometimes they don't have enough water, sometimes the supervisors don't agree. They think that they are losing their time outside when they need to be memorizing math and Spanish. And so school gardens could be a lot of work. So that's when we start questioning ourselves again and say, so what? What can we do? And Bruce is going to tell us about what we are doing now.
I'm going to shift gears a little bit actually and talk about methodology. So one of the central methodologies of our program of La Vida is participatory action research, which is basically just a simple cycle of planning, taking action, and then reflecting as individuals and as collectives about what happened. And we lay it out like this, with the definition of a problem, a plan, taking action, recording, taking data, and then that reflection process. And the key to this is that it's about generating information, it's about research, but it's also about generating change, collective learning, building community, and people's roles evolve as you go along. And it's laid out as a cycle, but it's really a spiral, right? And I think a great example of that was what we saw with Samina Raja a couple of weeks ago with the community, the neighborhood work that she did in Buffalo, and you could see how the kids' roles changed as the program went along, and they took on an advocacy role in their communities and with the city planners. So we thought that in our next round of the certificate program, we would start with food because that was something more universal. Everyone eats. Everyone's got concerns about food and memories, emotions around food. And we also decided to emphasize participatory action research more with the teachers themselves and ask them to carry this process out with their groups. So to begin with, we asked them to do appraisals, to do diagnoses with their groups of students about what the food is like in their school, around their schools, in their communities. And one of the fun things about working with teachers, particularly the ones that work with little kids, is that they're so creative, and they came up with a whole bunch of great ideas. So some of these were from our team, but some of these were things that the teachers themselves came up with. So for example, they did archaeology of garbage. So we would dig into the trash cans in the playground or look at the trash in the schoolyard or around the school and figure out what people are eating. We had a teacher at a university who wanted to establish compost at the university, so she asked her students to bring in compostable materials, but then they used that as a way to analyze their diet, how much fresh food, what kinds of fresh food they're eating at home. This is an example that I really like. This was a teacher who wanted to celebrate all the resources, food resources that her community has. It's actually an autonomous community. And this teacher asked her students to put together this healthy eating plate, which is modeled after the Harvard plate that we presented to them. But it's got all the foods that they use in that community. So in the protein section, we've got some of the usual stuff, but we've also got insects and snails, and just a whole wealth of fruits and vegetables and so forth that are traditional in this community. And then in the reflection and observation stage, we asked them to put together some lesson plans to think about, okay, we've developed this, generated this information from our observations, how are we gonna give this back to the rest of our school community or to the broader community? And again, a lot of creativity here. Some people did sort of more conventional reports or poster presentations, PowerPoints, but others did more creative things, theater, radio scripts, workshops. This was an example I really like because these were a couple of preschool teachers that had the challenge of working on these topics with little ones who couldn't maybe express themselves so easily. So what they did was actually observe what each child was eating, what his or her food preferences were, and put together a little portfolio for each kid. And then had a workshop with the families where they presented the portfolio to mom or dad and asked them to reflect on what their kids are eating. And then they did some reflection as a group, and they said, okay, what's good? And they found a lot of good in what their kids are eating, and what are the problems that we have? And next one. So one of the problems that they identified is that they had some challenges for thinking of things to send to school with their kids or what they could serve to kids on the playground that was going to be something that the kids would want to eat, that's going to be healthy, that's not going to spoil, that's not going to stain their clothes too much. And they realized they didn't have a lot of ideas, so they invited in a chef that was working with us. He did a little workshop with them, gave them some recipes and so forth. And then they enjoyed it so much that they reproduced the same workshop for another group of parents. But there were a whole bunch of follow-up actions like this that came out of the action research process. So some of the schools, some of the classrooms said, okay, we're going to allow kids to eat healthy food or drink healthy beverages in class. Anything else, they can still drink it on the playground, but not in the classroom. They invited in new vendors to school to sell fresh fruit and veggies. There was a high school where kids wanted to establish their own co-op to sell good food. There were some teachers that worked with their kids to prepare traditional recipes with local ingredients. Some people went to the school gardens idea, and there was a teacher, actually a volunteer, who worked with the school to establish a school garden, and then every month they celebrate what's there by harvesting and preparing a breakfast together, and the parents are astonished to see how much good fresh food the kids are eating. And I want to close with some reflections from one of our star teachers who wrote an essay about what this action research process meant for him, but also for his students and the family members. I'm just going to read these quotes. This is from Maestro Hugo, who's a primary teacher. He said, "We presented the results of the food diagnosis to the moms and grandmothers, the evaluation written by their own kids and grandkids, asking them for their ideas to solve the problem, open space for horizontal, respectful dialogue. Right away, they committed to paying more attention to what the kids eat, making sure they have breakfast before school, and that they bring healthy food for recess. We agreed that we could eat fruit and porridge in the classroom. They started to bring lots of fruit for snack time. It was no longer necessary to remind them what's healthy to eat and what isn't. As I opened myself to dialogue, to listening, and became more attentive to their emotions, my students ventured to make proposals about what and how they wanted to learn." So we can see that a dialogue, that cultural reflection taking place about how we want our relationship with our food systems and with each other to evolve.
I think we're going to do one last clicker question to follow that up with. Which of these the following is not one of the major stages of participatory action research? See if you were listening. A is identification of a research question or problem and a plan for addressing it. B, hypothesis testing. C, taking action to address a shared concern. D, reflection regarding the outcome of actions taken and possible follow-up. You were listening. 81% of you. 19% are checked out. So to transition, and Monique, maybe you could start by thinking about this question. One thing that I also am teaching about food systems. This very class is part of our effort at the University of Michigan to try to think about how do we teach people that a different food system is possible and that they can be a part of transforming it. But I've also often grappled with thinking about some of the critiques that both activists and scholars have sometimes had with certain types of food systems education programs, especially ones that really focus on teaching cooking skills or nutrition. As you mentioned, a lot of schools don't have nutrition programs anymore. Yet when programs, whether in school or outside of school, focus on nutrition, they're sometimes critiqued for being apolitical, for not thinking about the history and the power dynamics that have created structural injustices that make it really difficult for someone, even when they have the knowledge, to do anything about it's not a simple behavior change. Samina Rajo, who was here a couple weeks ago, alluded to that, and I think other speakers have alluded to that some have also called it victim blaming, that if you're just teaching someone, oh, you just can change your behavior, you just need knowledge. A lot of times the knowledge is already there, but many of the income that you need, the actual physical presence of healthy food is just not there. And then you have bombardment of marketing and so many other factors come into play that shape the ability for people to, even social networks that don't necessarily support a change. But more than anything, it's this historical inequities that create the food environments often that we're in, that I think a lot of people often critique with nutrition and cooking classes. Despite the fact that we do need to reskill, and that people have often forgotten some of these skills and mindsets around food and connections to food. But so how do you respond to those critiques, and how has the approach you've taken to try to educate people, maybe taken a different approach so that it really is focused on transforming the food system and not simply about individual behavior?
Sure. So I don't disagree with the critique, but we have to remain active. Like I shared and Chef Kevin shared, some of that knowledge is not there. And that's a part of the structure, the structural inequities as well. So, it's still important to be a part of the change where we are. And there is a doctor named Terry Mason, who is the COO of the Public Health Department in Cook County, where Chicago is. And he states that there needs to be a complete shift in the value proposition in America. The medical industry is relying upon people to become sick. The food industry feeds illnesses. So it's going to take people like him with the credentials that we value so much to start raising these things up, and the people who are mostly impacted to continue to enact these changes while the shift happens.
All right, what are some of the specific topics that you focus on, or maybe the strategies that you focus on in the work that you do with youth or the community that you work with, that tries to approach this education process in a way that is more holistic?
Rephrase it for me, please.
I'm just curious about what topics you focus on when you work with communities, and what strategies you use to try to teach communities or youth that you work with. Are you involving them in the garden? Do you involve them in? We
have to really get basic. We have to undo a lot of things. A lot of what we've experienced is there's trauma even going into a garden and on the land. There is a disconnect. We don't view the earth as a living entity a lot of times. For a young Black person, it's slave work all over again, being back on the land. So we really have to get through these walls and these barriers and recognize that it is a sacred relationship to grow food. It is not so much a privilege to have to go and buy everything when there's not equal access to wealth and money. So it's really, really getting back to the basics and recognizing the power it is to grow your own food, to walk right outside. You don't necessarily have to have grass, which is not even native to this land. It is possible to grow your own food. So we have to start very, 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 very basic and just re-educating.
I'm curious to know, I want to get back to this question too around the food that students eat in school, and how do you feel like that plays a role in the education process? Chef Frank, could you maybe think about that?
And so, I mean, there have been numerous studies done ad nauseum that show that, a poorly nourished student can't function. A poorly nourished student can't focus on what's being taught. That poorly nourished student is set up for failure from the moment they walk into the door. So from the most fundamental and I guess you could say basic aspect, students, kids, whatever age, we need food to function. We need food to be able to focus. We need food to succeed in school. We need sustenance. From I guess my personal point of view and the point of view of my job, it's more than just giving somebody breakfast. Because I could easily serve Pop-Tarts all day, every day for breakfast. My participation would be through the roof. Kids would eat Pop-Tarts all day, every day. They would love it. They would love me. It would be great. They would crash an hour after they ate it. So then you'd have a classroom full of agitated 8-year-olds trying to focus on an English lesson. Not the best idea. So we have to take into account what we're putting into our body. Specifically as it pertains to nutrition, it's about much more than just that we eat. It's about what we eat. It's about how we eat. It's about when we eat. It's about what we do with our bodies after we eat. And I think that piece has not been focused on enough, specifically as it pertains to the National School Lunch Program. Like back in 2012, there was this huge overhaul of the lunch program under the Obama administration, and everything was made, super healthy and it was great, right? We're serving healthier food now. All of the kids are going to be great. They're going to be paying more attention. They're going to be having these nutritious meals, except for the fact that they didn't want to eat them. So, what good is this nutritious meal that's going into the garbage or not being consumed? We still have those same, agitated children. So we need to, speaking specifically from the food system standpoint, we need to reevaluate the entire thing. Because, like I said, it's not purely about what we eat, but how we eat. So if somebody wants a cheeseburger, cool, give them a cheeseburger. Just don't do it every day and don't make it a 1 pound cheeseburger when a quarter pound will do. So.
You talked about with the student assembly, student teacher, parent assembly, or advisory committee, that sometimes there would be different opinions about, wanting pizza all the time and chicken wings. So how do you introduce new foods that are more nutritious in a way that, you don't just put it in front of them, do you? What else do you do to try to, there must be some kind of education process.
We did just kind of put it in front of them, and that didn't really go over well, right? Because we had, we used to do what's called Meatless Mondays. So on Mondays we had, everything in the district was vegetarian, which from a cost standpoint, speaking about business, from a cost standpoint was great. From a nutrient density standpoint was great. From a participation standpoint was horrible, because the kids basically felt like we were forcing them to eat even healthier than the government was already forcing them to. So they kind of rebelled. So now it's more about that education piece, because like I said, we don't really necessarily have that that knowledge base. So we provide that. We have a contract with Food Corps, where some of our Food Corps staff goes into schools, specifically K-8 schools, and they do product testing and they do nutritional education. The problem is it's only for the K-8 students, not the high school students, but their lessons are geared around like harvest of the month, or like if I'm menuing a local vegetable that month, their lessons will be geared around that, so that when the students see it on the menu, it's not something that is foreign to them. Because a lot of the times we found out through our work with the Detroit School Garden Collaborative that our students have no idea that vegetables and produce actually needs to be grown. Like like we had students who pulled carrots out of the ground and said, "Oh, this is where it come from." I just thought you went to the store and get it. Like nobody actually took the time to teach them, or they never took the time to think about how this food gets from, where it was to where it is. And that's another thing that we need to focus on. Or the system in general needs to focus on like I said, the knowledge base, because people don't necessarily. A lot of our students and some of their parents don't necessarily know where food comes from, or how much hard work it is and what it takes to grow that produce and to keep the fresh, nutrient-dense foods on the plates.
One last question I want to ask you, and then I want to see too in Chiapas if there's similar challenges, is that there's this big push towards farm to school in terms of trying to procure more food locally. So I'm curious to know what efforts the Detroit public school system has been trying to do around that, and what the challenges are. Maybe some success you can talk about, like when it has worked, how has it worked, okay. But also what are the challenges? Like why aren't you buying 100% of your food locally? Okay,
so I'll start with the good news. You all may or may not know, October is National Farm to School Month. So I had this great idea earlier in the school year last year that for October we would have local produce on the menu every day, and we actually were able to do it. So this year we're gonna try to get local produce for every meal every day. So both meal periods, breakfast and lunch, versus last year it was just either breakfast or lunch. And the reason that it can't be done 100% of the time every day is, number one, local produce is expensive. I mean, fresh produce, fresh local produce, specifically fresh local organic produce, is much more expensive than the stuff that's getting shipped from California. That is going to be 7 days old when it gets to me, and if I'm lucky, I might get 2 days of shelf life on it before it starts to turn. So, I mean, you got to remember that the school lunch program is the only department or the only business unit within the school system that has to be fully funded by itself. We can't hit the bottom line unless it's to contribute money to the bottom line. If we draw money from the bottom line, then we run the risk of being outsourced to management companies like Chartwell's, which is a division of Compass Group. Compass Group, if you all don't know, is like one of the largest employers in the world, and pretty much all they do is staffing within restaurants and institutions. So there's a lot of outside pressure on us to make sure that we are financially solvent. And another unfortunate part is that the maximum reimbursement we get per meal is about $3.52. And of that $3.52, I have to not only buy food, but I have to pay everybody's salary. I have to buy equipment. I have to buy, trucks. Pretty much everything that goes into putting that meal on the plate, which is quite a bit, because when you think about it, the school system, if you have a self-op school system, you're most likely going to be the largest restaurant corporation in your city. Like, we have more kitchens than McDonald's does in Detroit. Truth be told, we have more kitchens than McDonald's, Burger King, and Wendy's combined within the city of Detroit. But we make considerably less money because we're getting $3.50 per meal versus them getting $6 or $7 or $8 per meal. So that kind of in a nutshell encompasses the difficulties we have with doing fresh local produce every day. And the way we got around it, well, to an extent, was getting a USDA grant to start school gardens. So we started like I said, our 2.5 acre farm, and all of the produce from that farm is folded into the school lunch program. Problem is the harvest season is right during the middle of summer, so we don't really have a lot of people to serve. So we had to invest in a blast chiller. So this year we're going to be growing more root crops and things that are like a little bit hardier, so that we can freeze them and use them over the course of the school year.
And if you had a lot more money, could you buy all of your food locally?
Yeah.
Really?
We need a lot more money, but yeah. I mean, so like money fixes everything,
wondered,
right?
I'm trying to get at, is there enough being produced, first of all, locally, let's say 200 miles,
No.
and second of all, are there not, I have always heard there are also major logistical challenges, especially from sourcing from very small farmers.
Yeah, there is. So I actually I convened a meeting with a lot of our local urban growers, because one of the things that one of my reasons for wanting to purchase local produce is for economic development. And if I have people literally in my backyard growing produce that I could put on my menu, why would I not, right? Because I'm probably serving their children anyway. But the issue that we have is our broadline distributor, which is U.S. Foods, won't purchase from anybody who's not GAP certified. GAP certification is the USDA certification for good agricultural practices. It's essentially a health inspection for a farm. If you don't have that certification, which like low end is $600, and that's like relatively expensive for somebody that's only growing on like 1 acre, then our broadline distributor won't purchase from you. That's number one. Number two, you got to remember we serve about 40,000 to 50,000 meals a day. Low end, I'd be looking at, because we have 2 vegetables on our menu every day. So low end, I'd be looking at about 40,000 servings at pints a pound. We're looking at about 10,000 pounds of usable yield that I would need for vegetables per day out of 180 days in a school year. So there's quite a bit of produce that I would need, and sourcing it all locally would be nearly impossible. So we have like our definition of the word local is anything within the state of Michigan, because like within Metro Detroit, there's just not enough. So we have to go over to the west side. We have to go over to the UP sometimes to get things. We're able to do it, but our version of local isn't hyper local because it can't be.
Great, thank you. I think that helps explain a lot more of the challenges.
No problem.
I'm curious, actually, before we get to Chiapas real quick, let's stay in Detroit for a second. I'm curious to know if Freedom has, like, what do you do with the food that you produce? Have you ever sold your food to local daycare centers, schools, restaurants, and do you face similar kind of challenges with GAP certification and things like that?
We have participated in markets at the Eastern Market. We don't sell a lot of our food. We eat a lot of our food. It is a community garden. We do have a farm stand being built on our property right now. So food would be sold. It's accessible to any of our neighbors in our area, and we have sold to some local businesses.
And you haven't tried to pursue GAP certification?
No, we have not.
Okay. Yeah, which plenty of farms don't get certified organic or GAP certification because they can form those personal relationships with restaurants or organizations, even universities, and who aren't necessarily always going to require it. So I'm curious too, in Chiapas, I know that we want to understand some of the differences. What's the situation there with school food and integrating that into the education process, but also the procurement, and are there similar challenges, or how do things work in schools there? Do they even offer? I know some school systems globally actually don't offer school meals.
Yeah, in Chiapas, it's like very different from school to school and from region to region. Many schools don't get any food except for the little stores that are private or sometimes run by the teachers selling candy or snacks during the break. The government offer some food for some schools, and it's interesting because it doesn't belong to the education minister. The food in the schools is run by the social development minister. And they send food to some of the most poor schools in packages that they don't have people to prepare the food for the kids. So sometimes the teachers make agreement with the parents, mainly the moms, that they will cook like the breakfast for the kids, and they need to be very creative because what they offer in those boxes are oil, texturized soil, canned tuna, salt, sugary cereals, and milk, things that are not in our culture, and so many times it goes to the garbage, or in very strict schools they force the kids to eat it or they won't go back to play. So sometimes that food is like a punishment. In many schools, the moms decided that we don't want to cook, we don't have time. So the school give them away the food to take home, and many times that food is sold in the city. So it helps because it's a revenue for the family, but it doesn't help much for nutrition. Now the government is experimenting with a new system with the escuelas de tiempo completo, like so that the kids will stay at school from 8 to 4 or 8 to 5, and so that will force them to eat in school breakfast and lunch. And it's an experiment that the government is doing so that they will be sure that the kids are eating at least twice a day. And in that case, the teachers are the ones in charge of buying the food and look for someone to prepare it. And what is interesting is that with this experimental system, they are trying to reach at least part of the food locally. In Chiapas, it's different because most of the rural schools are in the middle of agrarian regions and agrarian landscapes, so there's enough food to offer, and it would be like more culturally appropriate for the kids if the food was sourced in the young towns instead of this industrialized food that they are not familiar with. I don't know if there's something else.
Yeah, just to contrast a little bit. So we don't have all these regulations to deal with. I'm sure that most things in Mexico are pretty heavily regulated, but if we go to the countryside in Chiapas, the regulators aren't getting there for the most part. So that's bad in the sense that, it opens the door for different kinds of abuse. It's good in the sense that there's opportunity for a lot of creativity and for people to come up with their own solutions locally, and that's why some of our teachers have been able to be so creative in what they've done with their groups. I think another point that is important to make about Chiapas has to do with the water, because almost no one has really potable water, and at the schools, sometimes there's running water. There's not even always running water, and you can almost never drink the water out of the tap. And that's one of the reasons that people would tend to buy something to drink. And it's, if it's cheaper to buy Coke than to buy a bottle of water, or sometimes there's not even a bottle of water available. That's one of the things that motivates people to drink all these sugary drinks. And it's, I think, should be considered a fundamental human right that people have access to drinking water, particularly, if they're shut up in a school all day. So some of the teachers organized themselves to work that out. Mexico actually had a soda tax implemented a couple years ago that was supposed to generate revenue that would be used for putting drinking fountains into the schools. We're still waiting.
Well, I have other questions that I can ask, and I will ask if there aren't enough questions from the audience, but I wanted to turn to the audience for now and see what kind of things you all are curious about. Elise, could you help us with, and maybe Anika, or we'll just rely on one, make you run around.
Hi, my name is Aline, and I'm a nutritionist at the school feeding program in Brazil. And there we have a big program, and we serve 1 million meals per day. And it's really big, and we have many policies to help us to have fruits and vegetables every day for the kids. The smallest ones, they have 5 meals in the school from 8 to 5. And some of them are organic and from local family farmers. It's very good. But what we see in the end, the kids don't eat. They have the whole meal and they throw away the most part. And we don't have enough nutritionists to go to schools and teach them and to talk to them. Some of them, their gardens and the teachers are really engaged to help, but some of them we don't. So I'd like to hear from you, especially how you combat the waste and how we could do that, because there we have everything. We spend a lot of millions per month to have this food for the kids, but we don't see that is enough healthy food, as you said. We need to have more, but how we can do that?
Can you hear me? So I think specific. You said how to combat the waste, right? So I think specifically with DPS, one of the ways that we combated the waste was by starting to give the students what they wanted. So we like I said, we formulated that menu advisory council, and I changed the menu the beginning of this year, actually. So before in our high schools we had only 4 options available, and we had in our K-8 schools 2 options available. So one of 2 things would happen. We'd have some students actually did eat. More often than not, we have students who either didn't eat or got the meal to get the one thing off the meal that they wanted and then threw it away. So there's two things that we did. One of them is like a federal regulation. Now our students don't have to take the entire meal in order for it to be reimbursable. They only need to take 3 components. So there's 5 components for a school meal. You have your milk, your meat or meat alternate, your grain, fruit, and vegetable. Of those 5, they only need to take 3, one of which being a fruit or a vegetable. So that in combination with us, now we have 5 entrees available at our K-8 schools and up to 14 at the high schools, depending on which high school you have. They have a lot more variety, so students are going up there and they're only taking what they want, as opposed to having to take a lot of things. And we honestly told our staff to stop forcing the students to eat. If they don't want to eat, we can't force them to. And all it does is waste food, makes us look bad, it wastes taxpayer funds, which is never a good idea. So that was one of the ways that we combated waste. The unfortunate part is that we haven't really found any good way to both combat waste and increase participation. Like oftentimes, the two are conversely related. So.
Can I comment, please? And just to clarify, did you say 1 million meals a day? Okay. And 5 meals a day? Yes. With snacks? Okay. Well, I do want to applaud that because that's great. And we don't do those numbers, but we have the similar issue with children wasting, so we also give a choice. And what we have learned that if children prepare their food, they're more interested in it. There's a pride factor and a pride component, knowing that this is something that I made. And also, natural food and real food and healthy food isn't as glamorous as processed food. So that is the issue too, just really learning what real food is and what it looks like. And giving the children a choice is a huge deal. And also composting. With real food, you can also compost. So in nature, there is no waste. So.
Yeah.
Thanks for the question. And Brazil has been an important point of reference for school food and food systems in general. I think that ideally those kinds of programs linking schools to local producers would be accompanied with educational components, critical educational components, where students are asking themselves questions about, okay, why do we eat the way we do? In whose interest is it that we eat the way we do? Who's trying to sell us the food that we're buying? No, the one of the activities that we did was have students do transects, where they identified all the food and beverage ads in their environment, and how many ads are there for Coke, and how many ads are there for chips, and how many are there for lettuce, right? And start thinking about, okay, and who benefits when I buy this or that, and what is it doing to my body? And it's all, I think when we do it from with an inquiry focus, where the students are exploring these ideas without, having things metaphorically shoved down their throat, then I think that you can make progress pretty quickly on some of these issues, and especially if the kids are able to plant and grow and prepare some of their own food.
Yeah, a parent from a neighbor school knew me, and he said, I'm upset with you because you put my kid in trouble. He was playing at the garden and he started pulling some herbs, and he realized, oh, that herb is a carrot. And so he decided to harvest everything and ate all of them. So, but at the same time, so I'm thankful with you because he had never wanted to try carrots at home. So the garden is one that has been very well documented, the power that when we cultivate our own food, we are more willing to eat strange things such as kale or elderberry or carrots. And also, coming back to the first question, Lesli, about if one person changing the way of eating will change the food system, I think that it depends who that person is. When we saw that those teachers are changing the way that they are eating, that they are recognizing that the local food is good, that is hip to drink the pozol, that is this drink made with, or it's more like a drinkable tortilla, that is good, that even the most wonderful teachers drink them, so that the students are putting attention. So we need to behave when we are just talking about the food systems, because an empty discourse won't change our food system, but our actions will do it.
Any other questions? We'll get you next.
Hello, my name's Jana. I work for U of M for a program called Project Healthy Schools. We do a lot of education around school food. And I just had a question about how each of you, what are your strategies for recruiting those key people that focus on education with the kids? At least from our perspective, sometimes it's hard to find, who are the community members that are going to take this work with us, because it takes a lot of people to do all these things that we're talking about, like a lot of different people that are interested in giving their time to help educate the kids. So I'm just wondering what each of your strategies are in finding those champions.
FFG works with a few faith-based organizations in our neighborhood, and with our programs being family-oriented, we champion for the entire family, because a lot of times we have instances where we're able to get our youth to enjoy the food that they've grown themselves, but when they go home, it's no longer offered or it's not a regular thing. So we focus on the entire family and those strong community outlets like churches and things.
So we're actually pretty lucky in Detroit because people generally come to us. Maybe not necessarily in the way that we would want them to. It's generally in like, a bad Facebook post with a picture of green ham that was not supposed to be served or something like that. Or a complaint to the super. This actually happened. A teacher who complained to the superintendent that he's able to make smoothies for his class of 30 kids once a week. Why can't we do it every day for the entire district? Because logistically, those are exactly the same. Not really. So when we get things like that, we like to try to turn a negative into a positive. So, we kind of turn it back around on them and say, all right, if this is what you want, how are you going to help us do it? We are more than willing to do it. As a matter of fact, we talk about, some of the initiatives that we've already undertaken, and it's like, we're trying right now, but we can't reach every place every time, 100% of the time. We need help. So, what are you willing to do to help us out? Because we're all working in this. We're all working in this together to, educate our children and to feed our children the best possible meals. So, we all kind of have to have a stake in it.
It's the same in Chiapas. School teachers come to us. We even charge them to take the training program, and they promote our teaching training program with the other teachers. But so far we have trained around 120 teachers, and we are wondering if the teachers that really wanted to change and the food system in the classrooms, if the ones that are like willing to spend the vacation the summer vacation with us, the weekends, are just those 120. So we have a similar question, how we will scale up this program.
Yeah, I just want to mention a couple of strategies that we have in mind for that. One is curriculum development. So teachers are busy and they've got a lot of demands on their time in terms of what they need to cover in class. And we think that that food work is a great opportunity for learning all kinds of subject areas. So we are working with the teachers who have been in our program to develop lesson plans that work on topics in chemistry or social sciences or Spanish or indigenous languages or whatever. There have been a lot of creativity in finding those curricular linkages. And then we're circulating that information in book form and online. And another important way we've been scaling out is through a school gardens network that I think maybe Helda mentioned already. No. So our teachers, the graduates from the program, wanted to stay in touch because they did feel kind of isolated, most of them in the schools where they were working. Some of them were able to recruit colleagues to join into the garden work and the food work, but a lot of them were sort of on their own. And so they wanted to keep in contact with the teachers who had been in the training. They wanted to keep learning from each other and supporting each other. And one of the ways they do that is through Chiapas School Gardens network that's now meeting every other month, and the teachers are, we organized the first few meetings, but now they're organizing it themselves. We're rotating around the state to different schools, and they're the ones that plan the program. Sometimes they asked us to cover something thematically, but that's the way we're keeping things going and getting more people on board in other parts of the state. And there's also an international network that's been going for 9-10 years now. We're going to have our next meeting in Chile in November.
I think we can fit in one more question. There was a question, somebody raised their hand down here. Elise?
Question for Chef Frank. I'm just wondering if your contract with U.S. Foods allows you a certain percentage of buying power to use for local foods within Michigan, or could you just have to, I mean, everything through U.S. Foods obviously would have to have that certification, but are you able to buy from farms outside of the U.S. Foods program?
Yeah, we are. So our contract with U.S. Foods is specifically for warehousing and distribution. So it's kind of a sweet deal because they basically bring in whatever I tell them to. So it's still, like I said, it's still a little bit difficult, specifically for the local produce just because of the volume that we do. But it's the sourcing piece as it pertains to, like, getting U.S. Foods to buy it isn't very difficult, like, beyond the need for GAP certification. And then we also have the option to, like, purchase one-off things from other vendors. Generally, we use La Piccolo, which is right outside of our office. Actually, we do some work with Michigan Farm to Freezer. We work with Cherry Capital, which is based out of Grand Rapids. So we do
Traverse City.
Oh, okay, Traverse City. So Peterson Farms is in Grand Rapids. So we work with pretty much whoever we can to get as much local produce on the menu as possible. Our two biggest issues are cost and availability.
But Farmer to Freezer allows you to then have food produced in the summer that you can use during the school year.
Yep. They're actually putting together a root vegetable blend for us so that we can use it. It's going to be, I think, butternut squash, parsnips, beets, and maybe carrots or potatoes. So hopefully that'll be on the menu in October.
Why don't we have 3 minutes? I always like to go right to the last minute. So is there any final thought that Bruce, Helda, Monique want to maybe leave us with?
No, we are not going to be able to say the final words. I think that food literacy is key to change the food system, but that food literacy needs to be not only a discourse, it also needs to get people involved and with the activities like planting or cooking or visiting experiences. And also another key factor is to touch people's hearts. When we think about our ancestors, about how our great-grandmothers used to cook, about how the foods that we ate when we were little, that's when people start to change, as involve brain, hands, and hearts.
I could not agree with Sister Helda more when she was saying touching people's hearts. That is when you have the ability to change a person's mind, or when a person's heart is touched, then their mind has the ability to change.
Bruce, do you have anything? That's a good way to end. All right, thank you all so much for joining us tonight.